All right, we are here back at House Education, April 19th, 2024, taking a look at S204, the Senate's literacy bill. And we're welcoming Bud Myers here, who has an extensive background in Vermont education and literacy. I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, but welcome, and we appreciate you being very accommodating to the schedule shifts and making time for us today. Thanks.
Well, you're quite welcome. I wonder if it's possible to share my screen. Can we do that?
Either that or we have access to all the documents you sent, and you could just tell us which ones you'd like us to open.
Okay. I was just hoping to start with the testimony itself, and I wanted to kind of be able to scroll down through it. So
Sure. Yeah. I think you now have co-hosting powers.
All right. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Oh, that's great. So, for the record, as everyone does, it's been a while since I've done this. My name is Bud Myers, and I've been a resident of Vermont since 1971, when I joined the faculty at the College of Education, Social Services at UVM. I taught quantitative research methods and educational policy and leadership courses from 1971 through 2013. And during that time, on a leave of absence from UVM, I served as Deputy Commissioner of Education for Standards and Assessment from 2000 through 2006. I was privileged to advise governors and commissioners on education policy matters from the administration of Governor Phil Hoff, can believe that, to the present. Some have been happy about that, others not so much. From 2008 until 2013, I served as director of Senator Jeffords, James M. Jeffords Center for Policy Research at UVM. And some of you may have seen me in and out of the State House during those years. I usually spent a couple of days a week down there. During that time, my colleague and I, John Rogers, submitted a report on equity to the Vermont legislature. And that I've provided you with a copy of that report. And I'll refer to some of the figures in it a little later this morning. The report presents findings and discussion from the study of the Jeffords Center responding to questions indicated by Act 156 of 212, Section 31. That is kind of a background that forms why I decided to kind of jump into this effort to create new legislation to support some pretty fundamental changes in the way we teach reading in Vermont schools. And let me say right off the top that I've read S204, and I find a lot to like about that bill. Many needed elements. Not all the elements that you all had in 826, but the focus on literacy, educator preparation, screening, and curriculum is a somewhat more comprehensive than was originally proposed a couple of years ago. Either bill, if passed, would improve Vermont's reading instruction. And neither bill provides a certain mechanism that would ensure all Vermont students will have access to high quality instruction. So that kind of sharpens my focus on this. And it's really all about equity. I came to equity the hard way. Last night I attended a meeting in Burlington on, ironically, kind of the future of education. I know you folks have been discussing some of that as well. But in 1970, I wrote a dissertation at the University of Connecticut that got me encouraged to come to Vermont to get a job. That dissertation focused on equity in Vermont or in Connecticut colleges, and a couple of the colleges came up pretty short when providing access to entrance and degrees for minority students. Some of the powers that be were upset about those findings. I could well understand that. So it was a good time for me to come to Vermont. Ever since then, when I was recruited to the Vermont faculty, it was by a dean by the name of Corrigan. And Corrigan was probably the person who I've known over the years most committed to the equality of educational opportunity of any individual I've known professionally. He gathered a faculty at UVM, about 70 some new hires between 1968 and 1973. And those faculty, by and large, were committed to equity and the equality of educational opportunity. Over the years, I've come to understand that getting to equity for opportunities to learn for all kids in Vermont is not an easy thing to do. There are lots of things that stand in the way, not the least of which is our embarrassment about the fact that we have inequity in our schools. And I provided you with a couple of graphs. The one that's coming up now is the NAEP reading test, which we received in 22-23. And you can see that there's quite a large gap in terms of those who are proficient, identified as eligible for special education, in other words, with disabilities, and those who are not. And that 41% not identified for disabilities represents pretty much the general population. So you can kind of fix in your head that for the NAEP reading test, Vermont looks like about 41% proficient, which, as everyone knows, or most people know anyway, now is a little better than the country at large, which is about 32% to 38%, that sort of range in there. So Vermont is doing okay, but terrible. And what I mean by that, as far as the NAEP scores, in 2023, 32% of US fourth graders were proficient, 38% of US eighth graders were proficient. So shifting down to our Vermont measures, and recognize, and I know other folks have talked to you about this, there are different measures of reading proficiency, lots of them. Tons of them. I've encountered many of them over the course of the time that I worked for the Department of Ed. It's just yikes. Vermont CAP, or the statewide large-scale assessment that replaced both the earlier form, the NECAP, and SBAC, shows that in eighth grade, we've got 65% as proficient, while 15% of students identified with disabilities are proficient. So that's kind of shocking, but it's also shocking to learn that our free and reduced lunch kids, which we called in both the NAEP and the BT CAP scores, free lunch eligible low income, only 39% of those. So, darn near half as many. That's the gap we're talking about. And that gap translates in the Vermont testing, that gap translates into a question for me. How do we feel about the fact that approximately 11,600 Vermont students with disabilities are not proficient in reading? And how do we feel about 17,360, these are estimates, right, of Vermont students who are low income are not proficient? That number puts a face, an actual student face. These are kids. These are real kids taking real assessments that are designed by teachers and by psychometricians to be able to describe what it takes to read on grade level and what it takes to be successful in the next grade. Those are the standards that are applied to these assessments, both of them. Now, you can argue about how accurate and reliable they are, all the rest, but I don't think you can argue very strongly about the fact that you've got these incredible gaps which represent the opportunities that kids have had to learn. Because if you're talking to a parent and you ask them, what is it with these kids? They'll say, hey, we're sending you the very best we can. We don't have any that we're keeping out of the system here. You're getting our best kids. Our best kids ought to be able to read. In fact, I think there's plenty of research out there, and you've already heard a bunch of it, that indicates that with effective and efficient methods of instruction, you can teach virtually every kid how to read on grade level. That is possible. We know how to do it. So, I guess my message from all of that is that this is a really good time to kind of bite the bullet. And in the second part of what I'm going to talk about, I can go down through the S204 and help you identify some of the questions that have been raised by folks who have taken a look at this bill. I think those questions need to be answered, but I think we all recognize that passing legislation like this is a process. It boils down to an event when you get the governor to sign it, no question there. But you don't get everything you want. We know that. What we should get, in my opinion, having been in this for over 50 years now and watched these gaps between low income and special needs kids grow practically that whole time, what I've come to understand is that now is the right time to make sure that that provision is in the bill. And what that provision will look like, if you take some time to put it together, I think, is instruction to the Agency of Education and the school districts that they need to set goals for gap reduction in reading proficiency. And when they set those goals, they need to track the results school by school. If you get tracking them grade by grade, that's fine within schools if the schools are large enough. You probably don't want to publish a whole lot of data about that where individual kids can be identified. In fact, there are laws that prevent you from doing that. But the message to the public and the message to the school districts and to the partners, the union, the Superintendent's Association, the School Boards Association, the special ed coordinators, all those folks who, by the way, buy into equity. They want equity. And let me just do a slight backup there. I haven't defined for you how I look at equity. Equity, in my experience over the past 50 years, has had two definitions. One is equity for taxpayers, and that's the one you're going to talk about a whole lot over the next several weeks. And it's going to be difficult to navigate all those different formulas. I spent some time working on Act 60 when I was at the department. I know how complex that situation can be, but that's equity for taxpayers. It leads, fortunately, to equity in spending, but it's the equity in spending coupled with the will to make effective instruction work for every child in every school. That gives you the equity of opportunity to learn for every kid. And that's the second definition. And that's the definition that matters to me, and I hope to you. Taxpayers in Vermont are going to be sorely tested over the next probably 10 to 12, 15 years, maybe longer, because our population is just not great enough to support the increases in costs that we're seeing, and not only in special education, but in healthcare and in the technology of education that's needed for our kids to be competitive in the 21st century economy. This is a hard choice for all Vermonters, and I think everyone recognizes that. It's the one you're going to struggle with. But the one you have some control over right now is the equality of educational opportunity to learn to read. And that means changing how we teach reading in this state, making it more effective for every child. And secondly, requiring that there be progress to narrowing those gaps between and among those groups. And it's not just the low income and special needs kids, but we've got some gaps between males and females. We've got some gender gaps that are beginning to emerge, I think, in some of the newly identified gender groupings. And certainly ethnic and language and racial groups are all at risk for inequality of opportunity to learn. And those questions have to be answered as well. But you can start with disabilities and income and make progress there in reducing gaps. And in fact, if you reduce the gaps in income, you're going to be reducing them in most of the other groups, because there are high correlations between membership in low income groupings and many of the other groups that we see. So you don't have to track each one of those individually, but you sure do have to disaggregate this data by these major groups. That's my major message to you. That's the one I wanted to get across. And why don't I just stop there and see if you've got any questions about that.
Great. Thank you very much. So the message I'm hearing from you is this is good progress, but what's going to be key is data and tracking, not just by region, but really as much as possible, disaggregating by all of the sort of categories you have told us.
Yes.
A lot of the bill has to do with how we teach literacy. I don't know if you want to sort of weigh in on that part of the bill.
Sure. The science of reading that you've or that the Senate bill aptly describes, I think it's a pretty good definition. That's the basis for the professional development that needs to happen in both the in-service and the pre-service world here. And let me just talk a little bit about how that might operate. That in-service, we've had some experience with. You may have heard that the Stern Center has had some pilot projects around the state where groups of teachers have been taught the science of reading and coached into being able to actually use it in their classrooms. And when that happens, what we find is that within about a year and a half, you can turn around those gaps between those kids who can and are not learning. So that definition that you'll find in the descriptions of the Stern Center program, but in general, in the bill itself, in 204, those are adequate. They've been abstracted from Connecticut and Indiana, Mississippi. You've heard from those folks. This is not rocket science necessarily, although it's new to many teachers in Vermont. How many? Well, let's talk about that for a minute. I'd estimate that out of the box, if we're talking about gap reduction over maybe a 8 or 9 year period, so that you spanned all the grade levels from K up through 8 anyway in elementary, you're probably talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 teachers who would be key. And the reason I say that is I know there are more teachers than that in those grade levels, but we already have some highly trained and very effective reading teachers in the state of Vermont who know the science of reading, who are able to use those curriculums in ways that are actually benefiting kids. So we're not going to hurt them, and we probably don't need to put them through training, quote unquote, for stuff that they already know how to do and are effective at. On the other hand, there are probably about 2,500 who have a very passing or dim understanding of what the science of reading is really about and how it works. And let me just do a sidebar on that. I think, Peter, you mentioned that you needed to really focus on getting all of this knowledge in front of our teachers in order to have them be effective. There's an alternative view of that, which is that you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And what I mean by that is that there are background information that you'll find in, say, Seidenberg's book. And I think, some of you have had a chance to look at that. If you hadn't, be happy to send you that reference. There are many references and many definitions of that science of reading that teachers don't need in order to be effective. Now, that's not to say that they're going to get those skills and knowledge from those modules. And the reason I've brought up those modules, and I think you've already heard about them from some other folks, is that there's some great research that's emerged over the past 25 years on the transfer of knowledge and skill for teachers in professional development. And we usually say that there are at least 5 different components of professional development in the science of reading, which need to be present and effective. And those are theory, demonstration, practice, feedback, and coaching. Those 5 major pieces. They're all discrete. They all describe processes in the in-service programs that teachers will get. But they need to be there, and they need to be carefully written and validated and accurate. The last component is coaching, and I think you've already heard some other folks talk about the coaching. And here's the deal with coaching. You can get up to 45% transfer with the first 4. Now, those first 4 components are roughly represented in those modules that the Agency of Education paid 3-point-something million for, right? Those 4 components are there in substance, but coaching is not there. And when you add coaching, you can get 95% transfer of the knowledge and skill in the first 4 components. Is that clear to everybody?
Yeah.
I used to teach this stuff. It was so much fun. Some days I'd show up wearing a bunny suit.
Go ahead.
Could you repeat the first 4? When you
Yes.
talk about the
Yes.
professional
Theory.
development and yeah.
Theory, demonstration, feedback, practice, coaching.
Thanks.
Okay. And it's possible the Stern Center has designed their teacher development programs with those 5 components in mind. I was on their board for 5 years, and we worked long and hard on something called the transformation program at the Stern Center to create effective professional development. So your next question is probably going to be, so how much is this going to cost, bud? I mean, after all, you're talking about 2,500 teachers, and the state's bankrupt, essentially, going forward, right? Well, not so much, okay? 2,500 teachers, yes. Cost for educating each of those to proficiency, where they could actually sit down and be sure that each of those kids, including kids with dyslexia, by the way, would be successful, proficient readers in a couple years' time. I think it would cost about $1,500 for each one of those. Now that's 3.5 million, which coincidentally is about what state's already spent. State got that money from the feds. The money to train teachers in the system I'm talking about also comes from the feds, but it comes from Title II of ESSA. And that Title II is scripted or directed by district plans that are approved by the Agency of Education. You know what the resource for that is? Last time I checked, it was about 47 million. So that's 47 million for the whole state. And the whole state could take 3.5 million of that and make one hell of a dent in this equity problem that I'm talking about. So that's the other sort of message that I wanted to bring to you. Let me stop.
Should have put that at the top of the testimony.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Yeah, so just to say that
Oh,
again,
yeah.
so the state currently gets about 40 million in Title II dollars.
Yeah.
That money is applied for by the LEAs, approved by the AOE, and that draws down the federal dollars.
You bet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The other thing is that there's a similar resource. It's not that much, and I don't know. I haven't taken the time to calculate it, but built into teacher contracts are in-service dollars for increase on the salary scale. And the school district's budget for them, it's a cost of education. It's one of the things that, is a cost driver for you. It's not big. It's probably no more than 20 million in the state. And it's distributed to those teachers who are taking courses at UVM. The district might contract for salary credit with a place like the Stern Center, so that there is money in school district budgets already. We're not talking about new money. And when I worked for Howard Dean, we used to say no new money. And I think when we talk about this bill and we talk about what needs to be done and what can be done, we're not talking about new money here. We're talking about having the will to allocate the dollars that are already there to the kind of professional development that will ensure that we can set goals to gap reduction and achieve those goals, not in 50 years, which is what we've been trying to do since I came here, but I'd estimate, and based on what the Stern Center's been able to do with its pilot districts, I'd estimate you could probably make a hell of an dent in 3 years' time.
We have just a few minutes left here. Committee questions? Yes. Representative Buss.
Thank you so much for coming today. I know that a lot of teachers have mentioned that if they are not specifically reading teachers, do they really need this type of coaching and professional development? Can you speak to what you think math and science teachers might need?
Could you ask your question again? It's one of the problems that I've got here with my sound system. It's not coming through. Maybe a little slower, a little clearer.
You got it. Thank you for coming. I wanted to ask the question about what you believe other types of teachers need that teach, say, math and science or STEM.
Great. Well, that's a great question. And as it happens, I've thought about that. One of the things that I do in my other life here as director of this lighthouse evaluation is that we evaluate professional development programs in math and science. And one of the things that I was really interested in the past couple of years when we were interviewing the interns in UVM's science MAT program called the Noyce Scholars. And in the interviews that we did on a program that used to be at UVM, but is now in New Hampshire, called the VMI, Ken Gross's original Vermont Mathematics Initiative. And every time we would, go down through, so how was the program for you? What did you learn? What kind of improvements would you make in it? I would always slip in some questions about reading. And one of the things I noticed was about 5 years ago when I started asking these questions, those students would say, reading? Oh yeah, we have this reading course. And one of the things they talk about is reading in the content areas, how we should find motivational books for our kids so that they get really excited about science and math by doing that. And I would say, well, that's a good idea, I'm all for motivation. But what if they can't read? What's your understanding of why they can't read? And 5 years ago, they were saying, yikes, I don't know. So we started gently, I think, changing that part of the UVM curriculum for the science folks around what it takes to be a competent on-grade level reader using the science of reading. Didn't mean that they had to learn the methodology of phonemic awareness and mapping and all the rest of that. But they needed to understand why some of the kids that they were trying to get to read those science texts couldn't read them. And then they would have the wherewithal to go to those reading teachers, and a lot of them were in the middle school where there are still reading coaches, you know. They would be able to go to them and say, hey, Johnny's not reading. I don't get it. And I don't think I know how to teach him, but he needs or she needs to be able to read this stuff that I'm giving them. And over the past couple of years, what we've noticed is that they really do understand that, and they're talking with those teachers and they can make it happen. Now, that doesn't mean that they've got to sit through all those modules and learn all that stuff. There are lots of different ways that content area teachers can learn about why kids can't read the material. But that's the question that they have to answer, you understand?
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, great question. I love that question.
Representative Austin.
Hi, Bud. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm just wondering, and you can just send it to me, but I'd really like to have a very clear definition of evidence-based, because we can't put in science of reading. We can't identify a method.
Sure.
But throughout the bill, and I think that kind of is the language that people are using when we say evidence-based, so that it's very, very clear. If you could send that to me, I'd love to add that to the bill.
I will send that to you. It's a great question, Sarita. Fortunately, by golly, there's a great answer to that question. 5 years ago, there would have been a lot of hemming and hawing, mostly hawing, not too much hemming. But what's happened in the past 5 years is that there's become a general acceptance of the What Works Clearinghouse standards for research. And you can, generally speaking, not 99.9%, but generally speaking, you can rely on that evidence of curriculum and methods, professional development programs. You can rely on the evaluation done by competent researchers using the research designs, the statistical controls. They're now available to us that we didn't have 10 years ago. When I started teaching quantitative methods on UVM's IBM 36065 in 1974, we didn't have much software. We got lots of software now. And it's pretty darn good at modeling and identifying the variance in these methods of teaching both teachers and kids that you can rely on. That's the definition of evidence-based instruction.
Thank you.
Representative Brady.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here and weaving in a lot of institutional knowledge here and history that we're grappling with, as you note, in the larger education landscape in the state right now and budget challenges. I'm wondering, throughout the bill, there's reference sort of again and again to the things that the Agency of Education would need to do. And we've also been stuck in this committee hearing again and again a lack of capacity at the agency. Not a dig on individuals. They're extraordinary folks working there, but just an under-resourced and a long-standing,
Right.
Predating when most of us have been at this table, sort of slow, I think dating back to about 2008, really kind of gutting that agency. And as we look more towards wanting to have common expectations across the state, wanting to close achievement gaps wherever they are, we keep butting up against this sort of, well, how do you do that in such a decentralized system? And if you don't have strong agency capacity and support, given your institutional history as well, I wonder about, what you've observed in terms of it functioning as an agency that is perhaps somewhat more political under the governor, and this is under both parties, not just the current governor, versus a department that's perhaps a bit more removed from the political winds and whims, and able to be maybe a more steadfast kind of steward of our public education system. Part one, then part two, then to the actual implementation of where we need to go on literacy. Does that potentially play a role? I think we're very stuck here between wanting to do so many good things, and then they are great on paper. What's actually possible in the field and through the agency in the realities that we're in right now?
Let me start with the last thing you said, because I always think those are important, and I've got a short memory, at 81. So I'll start with that, which is, what's most important to start with is, I think, the message that I tried to bring you today. You start with the assumption that the legislature is responsible for the welfare of every child's education. I mean, if you go back to the Vermont Constitution in 1777, the founders forced that new Vermont state to have a school in every county. It was a kind of a plant the flag. I guess I'm asking you to plant the flag on the behalf of equity, equal educational opportunity for every kid. And for the legislature, the governor, the agency of education, the state board of education, to all own that particular goal for all of Vermont kids. And it's not like this hasn't ever happened anywhere. I was an exchange student to Finland in 64, lived with a family. Both my Finnish brothers were in the Finnish school system, and boy, did they struggle in 64. I came back after working at UVM for a few years. In 84, I taught a course at the University of Oulu in northern Finland. And so I spent some time talking with educators and folks who took my class in statistics that year. And one of the things I learned was that there had been a tremendous change in Finnish education between the late 60s and the late 70s. The reforms of 1977 in Finland did away with the 8th class examinations. That was, everybody in the US, including Bernie, picked up on that. But that wasn't what was really important. What was really important was they set high expectations for teaching every kid how to read by the time they finished the 3rd grade. And that early childhood education and kindergarten, pre-kindergarten program that they did in Finland was the step forward. We've already made a lot of those steps forward. What we haven't done is commit to the outcome. And that outcome is equality of educational opportunity for every kid. So that was at the bottom. Let me kind of back up to the beginning of your question and talk a little bit about the agency of education. Let me say I hired many of those folks who are still there today. And I loved every one of them. Well, maybe not everyone, but most of them were just incredibly talented, dedicated, love Vermont kids, love Vermont schools. I mean, you couldn't find a better group of people to entrust, the education of the state's kids. That said, they've always been understaffed. The years that I served there, we struggled, even though at the time the governor had a very friendly relationship with the commissioner. We did the best we could for getting positions in during those years, but it was never enough because the demands, particularly put on the department by both new initiatives. We didn't have the kind of relationship between human services and education that we're still working on today, but it's come a long ways since those times. So when I hear people say, well, it's we're asking our teachers to be social workers, and what a terrible thing that is. Well, yeah, it is terrible, but they also have the opportunity to collaborate with human services in a way that they hadn't before. And if you ask them, and I have, they'll tell you that that works when they're able to make it work. Legislature needs to support the agency of education by reducing those barriers, adequately funding them where they can, but reducing the barriers for interdisciplinary, interagency collaboration so that some of the workload here is spread around. Otherwise, there's going to be not only burnout in the schools, but burnout in the agency of education. We've seen that sort of up and down, up and down. There are some years that, when I go back to talk to some of the folks I hired, it just breaks my heart because they're working hard and not seeing much gain. So every time you get a change, and let me take this opportunity to support what you folks have been talking about recently, which is to begin the reconsideration of what education needs to look like in the state of Vermont. And when I first came to Vermont in 1968, 69, Harvey Scribner was working on the Vermont design. I don't know if anybody around the table remembers that, but the Vermont design for education was cited all over the country as one of the most forward-looking educational blueprints that you could find anywhere. And over the years, there have been residuals of that document that has persisted and made Vermont education the good thing that it is today. All this flexible pathways methodology that's in the bills that you folks passed. There's some very forward-looking, fantastic stuff. Now, if we can just get the kids to read, that would be great.
But thanks very much for your time. I think we'll wrap here. The committee has one more task before we break for lunch or break for the day. You sent in great materials, and we've really appreciated your time and your accommodating our schedule. So thank you.
Could I just make one parting comment?
Absolutely.
Okay, one of the all the other stuff that I sent you there, the Jeffords Center report, I didn't get to those maps. If you look at those maps, one of the things you're going to notice is that there are certain areas of the state, and that's linked to equity and spending, but there are certain areas in the state where opportunities to learn and reading is reflected in those maps are not equally distributed. Okay, so we've got some real policy work to do across the state. And I think that's been one of your themes, and certainly the Senate has as well. The other thing that I'm scrolling on the screen right now is something that I'd urge you to take a look at. And Sarita, I'm happy to go over these suggested changes to the bill. They range from page 5 in the bill all the way to page 18. And those highlights in green, it's not a lot. Again, the suggestions that the people who you see on this list, some of whom have already been to testify before the Senate, and I don't know if they've testified to you, but some of these folks have spent a lot of time going over the Senate bill and identifying things that would make it stronger. So I recommend that you take a look at this. I knew we wouldn't get through all that today. And I know you've got a really heavy schedule, so I really thank you for the opportunity to present this to you, and I'm happy to come back and happy to work with you in any way that works for you.
Great, thank you. I'm actually looking through your suggestions right here. They seem very helpful. Yeah. Great, okay. Thanks a lot, I appreciate it.
Thumbs up.
All right, everybody ready for 191?
Yes.
Great, clerk can go ahead and call the roll.
Rep Brady. Yes. Rep Brown.
Yes.
Rep Stone, yes. Rep Taylor.
Yes.
Rep Brownell.
Yes.
Rep Williams.
Yes.
Rep Bus.
Yes.
Rep Austin.
Yes.
Rep Minier. Rep 2.
Yes.
Rep Conlon.
Yes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
So you'll be reporting that on the floor on Tuesday.
Day. Oh, Aaron and I were gonna get a